I recently sat down with my friend and fellow YouTube buddy Josh Medeski, who's currently in the process of adopting Obsidian. In the conversation, we cover a bunch of what I've learned with Obsidian over the last 2 years and the tips and tricks I've found for completing the creative process and actually delivering more content. We also cover a bunch of general tips and tricks for getting the most out of Obsidian. I've also added a bunch of chapter markers, so feel free to jump around to whatever piques your interest. With that out of the way, let's talk about how to optimize Obsidian for content creation.
Last time we talked about I used Craft and you were using Obsidian. Since then, I have continued to make videos on NeoVim and terminal-based stuff. And so right now, what makes sense for me is to make the plunge, make the switch, and start using Obsidian so that I can get custom hotkeys and keyboard-driven workflow that Craft really can't give me. And I really like version control. So the plan is I'm going to use Git to commit and track my, Zettelkasten system. But the main reason that we wanted to talk today is I want to know more about Zettelkasten and sort of how it ties into you being a productive human. So actually taking those connected ideas, but then executing them and making content, making videos, whatever it is tied to work that you do. Like, I just kind of want to start picking your brain about how do I better leverage a note-taking system, but also allow myself to track and prioritize projects to get them done with this different system.
Yes, and that is a big question pretending to be a small question. So I'll do my best to try and to explain that because I think that's sort of the tale as old as time. I guess probably makes sense to start with a disclaimer, which is I am not a purist when it comes to Zettelkasten. Like when we had our chat last time, I wasn't really a purist when it came to Para either. There are a few things that I'm a purist about, but ultimately at the end of the day, I'm a functional person in most regards. So anyone who is a Zettelkasten purist, I'm probably going to upset you. And I apologize. That's just not who I am. And I'm not saying my way is right. It's just what has worked for me. But I guess zooming out to why I wanted a Zettelkasten or a second brain or to use Obsidian, what I found myself doing is I'd have these ideas or I'd have these ideals, these principles that I believe to be true. And if you were to ask me a question about them, I could probably come to some conclusion about how I feel about it, but I was largely unpacking my own personal psyche instead of really knowing what my opinion is on something at any given time. And so that was kind of how I got started with Second Brain is like I wanted to better understand why I felt the way I felt about certain things and really understand my principles. And so that's kind of how I use it. It evolved out of my journaling practice that I also stumbled into, but like that's where this all started. And then it's largely a lot of jumping off points about the things I'm thinking about, the problems I'm trying to solve, and then going from there. So you're talking about trying to get more out of your Zettelkasten, how to make it functional. I think Zettelkasten is really great in that you're exploring ideas, but it's a divergent process. The whole idea here is exploration, getting ideas out on a canvas. And that's actually probably counterproductive from a getting things done perspective. And so at a certain point, you have to figure out when the divergent aspect of the process is over for a given task and stop diverging and say, okay, I've got enough here. There's enough meat on this bone that I'm going to switch into convergent thinking and actually producing some output from it. And I think that's the tricky piece is knowing when and also putting some guardrails on your process so that you are actually producing output instead of continuing to diverge because we can unpack our psyches for forever, especially if you're consuming a lot of external content and constantly feeding this evolution. I think you'll learn a lot about yourself. And in that regard, I get a lot of value out of it. And that's part of why I do it. But I have to supplement that with other things because Zettelkasten on its own, I don't think produces more quality output. It definitely produces input for your output process, but then you have to guardrail it to actually get things done. So I guess I'll pause there.
That's a super good point to bring up. And the maker of the second brain system, Tiago Forte, talks a lot about converging and diverging. And it's definitely my habit to always be exploring new ideas. And then I often find bursts of energy and bursts of time where I can bring it all together and create something substantial from it and share it with the world. And so I enjoy those moments, but I think often enough right now I have a hard time picking the
Mm,
topic. And I realize now the more and more I do Second Brain and the more and more I'm kind of putting myself out there on YouTube and the blog that I've been creating for many years now, I don't think it often matters what topic you pick. I think all that matters
mm,
is that you pick it, whatever it is. It doesn't really matter what the topic is. Just pick one and come up with your own reflections and the reasons in which your perspective is unique and present information to others in whether through education or entertainment or we're generally more educational in our focus on the content we
mhm,
create. I've even realized today that like maybe I just want to make informative content where I'm literally just sharing what's coming up in my field and making it consumable to others. And so it doesn't really have to be that complicated. I just have to find time to balance those ideas. So that's
So let
kind of
me
what's on
pause
my
you there
mind.
because you hit on a ton of things there. So I guess, first of all, like I think I'm a little bit further along in this process, mostly just because I've been doing Obsidian for a while. But let me be very clear that I still languish on which topic to choose. Like I'll show you my project list here in a minute, and there's like 30 things in there, and they're all pretty good, and they could all be great videos. And yeah, there's definitely a tension of, all right, I just have to pick one. And so like
Right.
before we went on air, you were talking about how like I've been creating a bunch of stuff. It's like I set sort of a 2 week timer. And so my internal timer is I need to produce a video every 2 weeks. It's just something I set for myself. And so like that is the thing that I think keeps me producing is like, all right, I've only got 3 days until that 2 week timer is up. I should probably get this video rocking and
Right.
rolling. I have to stop exploring and just pick a topic and get it done. And so, yeah, I still haven't figured it out, but that timer to produce, because like you were saying, like any of those videos can be successful. And so, like, getting the perfect video topic, although helpful, is not going to change the world. Like, the biggest thing is actually continue to produce and put
Yeah.
yourself out there because if you're not putting yourself out there, people are forgetting about you. That's just kind of the world we live in. Even if they like you, like there's so much else going on in their lives that they don't care, or at least it's not top of mind. They're not thinking about it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I guess the main topic we're bringing up here is like personal accountability. I think what we want for ourselves is the ability to complete the creative process. So Tiago talks about the code. So you capture, you
Mm-hmm.
organize, you distill, and then you express. And the express, my aha moment in doing this work has been expression is an important step to the creative process. If you just take in new information, even organize it, even distill it down into little bits that are like wisdom and something that's informative and helpful to you, if you don't express it, it's like it lives in this open loop. And when you finally hit publish or send that tweet out or whatever it is you end up doing to share that with other people, even if it's just a conversation, which is often enough for me, sitting down and talking about a topic, it kind of like closes this loop and allows you to continue that creative cycle without kind of feeling blocked up, which is something I've dealt with in the past. I just like have so much swimming in my head that I don't feel like I can let anything go, even if it becomes digital, right? Like these note
Mm.
taking apps. Okay, great, it's in a note taking app, but for me, the thing I'm holding myself more accountable to is putting that information back out in the world and letting it create that feedback loop that lets me, I guess, understand what works and what doesn't and evolve as
So
a person.
so let's unpack that. Sorry, I feel a little bit like a therapist, but so it sounds like there's a little bit of a Zeignarik's effect going on here, where you have a topic in mind, you put it in your note taking app, but you're not confident that you'll revisit it. And so it's still occupying space in your conscious mind where you can't quite let go of it because you're not sure if you're going to get it to some form of completion. Because like that's the whole thing, right? Zeignarik's effect, the whole idea here is it'll continue to stay on your brain until you're confident that you'll revisit it. And then at that point your brain can let it go and
Yeah.
you can move on.
I think often enough I can see the end result pretty clearly, but like what this interesting piece of information or interesting new connection I've made personally to something, saying, oh, wow, this came out, or this, idea's been presented to me. I know how that connects to my life and the other creative things that I understand or my knowledge of the world. And I'm like, great, this can definitely turn into something else, but I don't have enough time in the day.
Mm-hmm.
So it almost just becomes, I'm going to hold on to as many good ideas as I have, but I also am a human that needs time off and has a full-time
Yes.
job. And so I really don't ever, I would say
And
right
family
now,
matters.
yeah, I
Like,
mean, right now it feels like maybe every 1 in 10 good ideas where I really put effort into thinking about and start shaping and forming these thoughts, only about like 10%, maybe less, end up published, end up becoming
mm-hmm.
content I'm proud of and put out in the world. And so I have these 9 other ideas that are good, and maybe they're good for the future, but they just sort of float around, whether in my
Well,
head
and to
or in my
compound it
system.
further, you were talking about the informative content. The thing I've found is the really difficult videos that I spend a lot of time digging into the meat of a topic do okay, and the news informative videos do 10x better. And it's sort of like I take pride in what I do, and I want to like go the scientific route and really talk about something that maybe no one's talked about, or maybe it's not been widely consumed yet.
Right.
And YouTube does not reward that. There are exceptions, but in general, newsworthy content seems to have a lot more play than this deep scientific thing that you really spend a lot of time and effort into. And there will be a
Yeah.
select few that get really excited about it and think it's, this amazing thing, but it doesn't have that wide audience that the news
Oh,
content does.
absolutely. I think my best video took the least amount of effort and was the most shallow in its form factor. It was like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
this is just how things are. And it was like, okay, great. 30,000 views. I was like, whoa, okay, that's cool. Like lots of people want to know about this. And then my most underrated video is one I like the most and has probably the least amount of views. So it's funny that you say that, because that's absolutely, I think, the case, that we treasure certain things that often others aren't looking for. It's not that it's not valuable to them. I think for the
Mm-hmm.
ones that have seen those videos and get it, it's like, man, that's an aha moment. That's something that I want to click for you. And I want you to shift your way of thinking about the way things work by looking at that video. And then the other one is just sort of, hey, here's a cool thing that everybody's excited about. And here's, my interpretation of it. And it's like, okay, great. Just adding to the noise. But I don't think it's a bad thing to add to the noise. I think
No,
often
it's
enough, yeah, I think it's just a way people want to know. I mean, I like TV shows and stuff as well. So I mean, it's like there are things that don't matter that much that I'm excited about as well. So it's
everyone needs
funny
a
to
mental break.
find that balance of content and creation that feeds you and feeds the people out there that are interested in the same topics as you, I guess.
Oh,
Which you can speak
totally.
to because you have a really specific topic of the e-ink tablets world, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's one of those things. I work through it through rationalizing that some videos are for exposure, and then I create my deep content for those that do anchor on to like the key idea here, and will subscribe to the channel and go down the rabbit hole of the playlists. And so I can still do the deep videos that I want to do, because those who are really excited about it and who will stick around will refer back to them. And then the lead gen
Right.
videos, bring new people to the channel and get exposure to what we're doing, and who would really like what I'm doing but may otherwise never know that I exist. And so I do a balance of both.
Right. That's good. I think this conversation is helping a lot with my strategy. Some I think there's some videos already that I'm like, oh, I could make these videos. They're not going to change my life. They're not going to be the deepest thinking things, but guess what? I'll probably get a lot of views. And that That's
Yeah, and
okay.
you don't want to lean too far that direction, but
There's
like
some
figuring out
balance.
the mix that works well for you is the thing. Again, if you
Totally.
don't love the channel, at a certain point you're just going to give up on it. And so you got to do what's right for you because, I did a video recently on ARC and I think is by far the like most popular video I've ever done. It got like 250,000 views because Marquez Brownlee talked about ARC and then everyone followed that
Nice.
video down. But sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but for every 1,000 people that view a video, you don't hear anything back. Like you may
Yeah.
hear from like the 1% who comment, and half of that 1% will be people who are supportive and excited, and half of that 1% will be people who are uninformed or just are having a bad day and like will leave you a comment. So if you're not happy with what you're producing, it's going to wear on you because you'll have these detractors that will come out. And so just make sure you're
Totally.
doing what feels good for you, or otherwise why are you doing it?
Yeah, no, that's fair and helpful advice for sure.
All right, so I guess back to being pragmatic about
Sure.
what to work on. I guess let me show my Obsidian and maybe we can unpack that a little bit. How do I share, continue to share? All right, let me know if that's coming through for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Obsidian. I think we touched on this briefly in the previous video, and I think I've actually changed it a little bit since then. But like a key thing for me is just focus in general. So there's not a lot going on here. I would argue half the time I don't even have the files open, which seems unintuitive, but I think is a real testament to how good Obsidian is at letting you work and jump around, even though you don't actually have to look at the files. So more often than not, I'll hit Command S and I'll just be in focus mode. And this is how I work. And so I use the command palette for everything. Most things start with a daily note. So I'll hit Command Shift D. And again, that starts with 3 things I'm grateful for, a daily highlight, and then I keep any notes relevant to today. And then I can see what I wrote this time last year. From there, I'll write about whatever's topical for me on this given day. And that will usually lead to me writing about some topic that will ultimately end up in the graph. And I'll jump off and have those things. And I think it's really important to have both the temporal link and the topical link between your ideas so that you can see how you revisit things and how they recirculate. I think the biggest thing that Obsidian has done for me is to realize how cyclical life is and how much you come back to topics.
Yeah.
And it brings up this principle of don't start from scratch every time, which I think for the last like 10 years until I found Second Brain, I was. Every time I came across a topic, I was basically reformulating how I felt about it from scratch instead of building upon what I had thought about in the past. And I think that's the key thing here with Obsidian. So that is the basics of it. Again, all the calendar is here, and then getting into actually focusing that effort is I think where it gets really interesting. So by default, you've got your graph. I hit Command G, but like this is a bit tough to try and like navigate on its own. And doing the files is a similar thing. It'd be really tough to navigate it that way. And so what I do is in general, I will get rid of that right sidebar if I'm trying to focus. And I've got a handful of favorites that are around more convergent thinking. So if I'm trying to get something done, I don't want to see the files. I really don't even want to see this graph. I don't want to see the calendar. I want to be focusing on something in particular. And so in this case, I use this thing I built called my project list. And this uses the DB folder plugin. Oh, hold on. Let me get the guy's name because this thing is awesome. Raphael GB. It's basically like how Notion databases work, but instead of writing to some proprietary store, it actually writes all of the data elements for your Notion database into the YAML in the top of the file. So let's say I go into 5 things that Remarkable should tweak. All of these attributes that are in that database are actually in this YAML file, and they work back and forth. So I was working with my wife on this about a week ago. She's a Montessori school teacher, and one of the things she wants to do is track when she gives lessons to the children and how they're progressing and keep all that in a centralized file for the child. And so she was able to use this to do a very similar thing where she's got all of her children here, and then she has all the activities that she does with them across the top, and she knows exactly when she gave a lesson, and then she can see all that stuff in one centralized place for the topic. So, but trying to get things done, it all comes down to setting some idea of a due date. I guess there's sort of this prioritization process where you have an idea, it may or may not be good. I would argue when you're in the ideation phase, try not to qualify like whether it's good or not. Just throw it there and hopefully you have a process where you'll revisit it later. And so then I pick a handful of videos that I think are the most promising. And again, that whole 2 week thing, I will be very clear. I am not religious with this, hence why there aren't due dates on all of these. And I've started to kind of use my to-do list to manage this more, just because a lot like what you were mentioning, you start to have too many ideas and there's a decision fatigue around which one to go to. But this is sort of what I've been doing to try to keep me focused. And I still need to do this video about why I was wrong about Yabai, but I still haven't done it.
Have to.
Well, it's going to be a really good video for the 25 people who watch it. And again, like you said, it'll make me really happy because I did a video maybe a year ago about window management, and I tried Yabai then, and for whatever reason on the Intel Mac, it ran terribly for me. And so I quickly was like, no, not using it. Well, I don't want to say quickly. I languished for about a day and a half where I tried to make it work and I couldn't get it to work. And then,
can we explore one of these projects? Because you're going to have, if a true Zettel casting system will mean there are probably a half a dozen or more things pointing to it, right?
Yeah, so let's look at this video, the last video you and I did.
Yeah, sure.
I don't think there's anything too scary in here. Let's pull it open.
What just happened? You just clicked this and it created its own sort of cool
So these
view.
all link to real notes. So so think of this as
it's a note.
So I have this drafts. I have it projects. So I have this projects folder, which is separate from my pure Zettelkasten. So my Zettelkasten is topical. So think of those as being your de facto Zettles. And then I have a projects folder, which is me trying to create some deliverable around that. So it's an artifact that's going to leverage those. And then I may, if I come up with some primary content while working on that article, I might feed those back into my Zettles, but I treat them separate.
Got it.
So this was, and let me get back to where I was. So this was an artifact that I
curious because you got the calendar and the graph, and
I just screenshotted this apparently.
That's a screenshot.
Yeah, I don't remember the context. Yeah, cool. So this is just a screenshot if I hover over it. I'm trying to think of why I thought this was important.
And I know this leverages backlinks as well, right?
Yep. Yeah, so, and I think I have the backlinks at the bottom. You can also put them on the side if you, actually, yeah, if you put them over here.
Yeah.
These are all the things I mentioned in this.
Yeah.
Which is kind of wild to think about. I didn't realize I mentioned that many things when I was writing this, but yeah. So yeah, these are all the things that backlinked, and then I mentioned in my daily notes a couple of times in the working up to that session that we had, that I worked on it, that I started on it, that we talked about it. So this has all the content that's feeding into it, and because I also do my journaling in Obsidian, all the days that I worked on it, and then I mentioned it in my daily note. In this case, a daily note and 2 weekly notes.
I've been doing this as well in craft, where it's like every day, daily notes drive my everything. And I can even sense of how much I've worked on what by just looking at daily notes, cross-reference to the project. So that makes sense.
Yeah, because again, I feel very strongly that your brain works in a temporal manner and also in a topical linked manner. And so when you can bring the two together, you can see the context of, well, what was I thinking about before that? What was I thinking about after that? And then what does this relate to? And I feel like in a fairly lo-fi way replicates what your brain also is doing when you try and revisit these things.
Got it.
The other thing that I don't think we've touched on yet is having some sort of deadline or some interaction that's planned often drives to more content creation of like, I could go garden. Again, sorry, this is a term that I haven't used in this call yet.
Yeah,
But like
garden.
sometimes when I work in my Zettelkasten, I think of it as digital gardening, get a lot out of it, but I don't necessarily produce a ton of external content. But it feels good, and I explore, and I feel like I learn a lot about myself, but I don't necessarily have a plan or a direction. I find that having some sort of deadline or some sort of personal engagement, like our conversation, often leads to a lot of content generation that will often filter back into additional Zettles. So, like, I've thought about code and I've thought about Para and I've thought about Obsidian plenty of times, but I created this document because we were having that conversation. And there's a lot more content than I often produce on a given day. And I think I did this in a day because I had a reason to do it. I had some sort of deadline or forcing function to make me produce and to leverage what I'd already built.
Right.
So from here, any of these topics, you can either see the backlinks or you can hover over them and see the content. Oh, I should be able to hover. Personally, I don't use the hover. I usually will click on it. And so you can hold Command, it'll open in a new page. Or if you hold, it's Alt Command. And so like this is a view that I think is really interesting is when you come across a topic and you want to really dig into it, you can, I think I can also do it with my keyboard. So if I hit Alt, Command, Enter, yeah, so that'll do side by side. So this is how I like often do this. Is so like I'll do this usually just keyboard based. And so then if I go to a topic, and you can tell whether there's an actual file or not based on whether they're a darker color or not. So like Zettel doesn't have a file, but I can still reference it versus Maps of Content does have a file. So if I hold Alt and Command and press Enter, I'll now have that side by side. And I can navigate this completely from the keyboard. And like you were saying, if you hold Alt and hit Enter, it'll toggle there. And then similarly to browser shortcuts, if you hit Command left bracket, I can go back. And so like, this is how I do majority of my navigation is just through this. And then digging topics. If you do Command Shift G, you can get a local graph, which was actually what was in that screenshot that was at the top of the page. And so instead of seeing the global graph, you can see just the graph relative to this file and all the topics that were mentioned in it. And so this is pulling from everywhere. And so I think by default, it's got a link depth of 1. So these are all direct links. But if you really want to explore, so I guess like the opposite of what we're talking about, if you want to go into divergent mode, just expand this depth a little bit. And then you can really start to see the related topics. And again, I think that's the idea behind Zettelkasten is seeing the implicit relationships. This one's a very dense topic, so it's a little tough. Maybe let's pick, I say, like, let's go pick something smaller as it also has.
But I think this proves that you've been using this for over a year, right?
Yeah, Obsidian, so I think I started mid 21, I think is where I'm at.
And I guess that's the power of a Zettelkasten system is that every idea is connected to something, generally.
Yeah.
Like there's no.
Yeah, I mean, I could dry this up a lot by dropping the temporal. Right? Like if I drop the temporal stuff out of this will probably dry up a lot. But yeah. So like if I was really trying to write something based on this, I would filter out people and I'd filter out time. And then you just see topic to topic links and it gets a little bit easier.
What is your identifiers for that? Are they tags?
So I do it folder based.
Folder based, okay.
Because, and I'm not proposing everyone do it this way. Let me explain my why. So I publish my Zettelkasten or parts of my Zettelkasten online. Yeah. And so I need very clear boundaries of what is public and what is not. So there's a very clear wall that my personal notes, my time notes don't go on the internet. My people notes don't go on the internet because I don't want to accidentally share something and that person feel upset about it. So for most people, tags can work, and that's probably actually an easier way to filter. But because I publish parts of it, I want very clear boundaries that are heavily enforced in my publish process. That even if I reference a time note in a public note, or I reference a person in a public note, my personal notes about those things don't go out to the internet.
So I guess my main thought about that right now is like, It feels like Obsidian is easiest when you use a flat system where all your files are in one place.
Mm-hmm.
So when you like create new people or you create new projects or whatever, like, are you having to go out of your way to generate that in a specific place in a certain way?
Oh, fantastic question. I wasn't seeing this coming. Okay. So I have unbound Command N from new file and rebound it to this plugin called Quick Add. And I have enumerated my content types. And so these are all of my content types, and it does two things. It puts them in the right place, and it pre-applies the template that I've
Template.
created for it. So
Yeah.
instead of creating a file, I no longer create a file. I create a file of a type, and it does all of that magic for me. So like when I create a person, it's going to go into the person folder. It's going to have the person template. And so I really don't have to think about it.
Got it. Well, so
But out of the
then
box, you're right. There is kind of a barrier there.
I'm kind of used to, right now, I'm used to this idea of I'm going to create in Craft, it's you type the thing you're adding, and then it goes, boom, it creates a note based off of that thing you created. So in here, it's the same idea. You use the double angle brackets, you type the thing you want, and now that thing exists if you hit enter, right? Or whatever the key, like command enter or whatever. So for you, is it just slightly different where you're like, as I am about to put this thing in my note, I'm going to go command in person, Josh, and then I'll add Josh to my note? Is that kind of what you have to do in this workflow?
It could go either way. Yeah, I do agree there's some friction there. So you can either create it ahead of time, or you can mention it and then just click through on it and tweak it. So, like, for instance, let's go find something that doesn't have a file. So, para is not a great example because it would be in the root, but
Right.
let's just come up with some fictitious person. Let's say I mentioned Jane Doe really likes Arc, and that this happened just organically. So if I hit Alt Enter, Jane Doe now has a file. That's a real file. I have Command Shift M bound to move, so I can move it to people. And then I have Command Alt T bound to template, and so I can just apply a person. And so the person template does a couple of things. It sets the day, sets a category. So you can also filter based on category if you wanted to, which is kind of working like tags would. And you could do it with tags too, and that would be perfectly fine as well. And then I've got it set up where it takes their first name and creates an alias so that in future mentions, if Jane is a personal friend of mine, I can just mention Jane and it shows as Jane. There are people in my life that I'm on a first name basis with, and it feels much more organic to do it that way. And then I can go get rid of Jane because Jane's not real. So it's really about creating keyboard shortcuts for those things that you commonly do so that, again, you can do it all from the keyboard and it doesn't require you to go way out of your way.
No, I love that. It makes a lot of sense.
But it would be great if I could enumerate it when I create it. Like if I could say at person, like that would be cool. But I have a lot of structure associated with it, so I'm not sure if that would hold up in my case.
Yeah.
But other people may be able to do that. I wonder if it would put it in a folder. So like, I haven't tried this. What's in my blog? So if I did, sorry, we're going to go explore for a second. All at 1, 2, 3 does work that way actually. So you could do it that way actually. And then you just have to apply the template.
Yeah. Or write a plugin or figure out how you can auto detect templates based off folders or something. Would be the way of automating it.
I think there's something along that line. I think Templater might have that function where it basically applies a template the first time you load the page. And I think you can set some rules around how that's done. So yeah, if that sounds appetizing to you, I would definitely say go try that out. I think it could work.
Part of me wants to try a flat system first, but
I would recommend most people do the flat system. Again, it's only because I publish directly from here that I go foldered. I'm not pro folders. I think you're working against the way Obsidian's made to work. So yes, like go flat and then find that you need more structure and add structure only as needed.
Cool. No, this makes a lot of sense. So I think right now the big cost for me is losing all my craft notes. or deciding how much of them to export and even find out if they're in a reasonable format or not, which I don't know yet, how reasonable they'll translate.
So I guess for context, Obsidian was not my first note-taking setup. So I was actually in Stoic before this. So Stoic is how I stumbled into journaling, and I created maybe like 4 or 5 months worth of journal prompts in Stoic. And so yeah, like I had to feed that, and I definitely spent like an afternoon like cleaning up some weirdness with some of their markdown files. I think it's worth the effort. I mean, and you're clever when it comes to transformation. You can figure out how to automate
That's
a lot
true.
of that stuff.
Can we dig a little bit deeper at your entity templates? I don't know how best to describe them.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
like your command in. So you've decided there are certain pieces of content in your life that shape. So this quick add plugin, huh?
Yeah.
So this creates, yeah, because this is generally what I want that Craft doesn't give me really. They have a templates feature, but this idea of like tagging and organizing and sorting based off of what it is very appealing.
Yeah, it's almost like a mini model, right? Like if I
Like
think about how I program, these are my models in my life.
Right. So you have personal, person, seedling. Some of these are a little bit abstract. It's interesting. Topic, just a general topic, I'm guessing. Collection.
Yeah, so topic is
Nice.
probably like most common thing. I would argue most Zettles are topics. I toyed with this concept of a seedling, which is this idea of a topic that I mention in passing and I know it's a thing, but I haven't had the time yet to seed it out and to really make it a full Zettel. And so that worked as like a pseudo work list of topics that I need to go flesh out and really get my thoughts on them out of my head and into Obsidian. With that said, I haven't been mining these recently, so it's an easy remove if that feels duplicative.
But like a blog draft, like obvious area, something you probably don't do a lot of, but is something that is helpful to shape.
Yes. So hold on. Let me make sure there's nothing sensitive in my areas, and then I'll show you my areas.
On areas has become this sort of gray area in my time with the building a second brain community where people are like, I don't quite get it yet. Like, what does this mean? What is it? How does it work? Right.
And I'm not doing it correctly. Let's no, be
that's what I
clear
mean.
that
There's this like a gray area of the system, in my
so
opinion.
yeah, I'm like contriving areas and OKRs into something that works for me. So like I would argue areas, this root level concept is something I'm doing that's fairly true to para areas, where these are the things that are important to me in my life and things that I want to maintain a constant level of commitment and evolution to. And then I roughed out these as sort of KRs, key results, that would mean that I'm keeping up that my commitment to those areas. And so, and then I did sort of these quarterly, like, how am I doing in giving these areas? How well am I nurturing these areas and continuing to invest in them in a regular way? And so again, I don't think this is pure what Tiago intended, but it's something I've found that's useful for me to check in with myself to see if I'm doing what I need to do or am I spreading myself too thin.
Totally.
Especially like with my family. Like I get so focused on whatever I'm excited about at the moment, and I'm kind of a hoarder when it comes to like digging into a topic and going to the nth degree. And so what I want to make sure of whenever I'm exploring or working on YouTube or anything like that is that I'm still making time for my family. I'm still involved and not letting any one part of my life like take over the other parts.
Yeah, I totally get that. And so I guess the main thing that I want to know in like, how are you tracking tasks in Obsidian? Is this become your task manager, or are you outside of this have a task manager with project lists and steps of actions that you have to take to be a productive human?
Yeah, so I keep my tasks separate. I generate a lot of tasks. And so being able to create tasks incredibly quickly from anywhere is really important to me. And so I'm not saying you can't do that in Obsidian. Honestly, I haven't tried. And I know some people have had success with that. but I want a best of breed task manager when it comes to tasks and having a
Yeah.
centralized inbox and like one place that I throw everything that I can work through incredibly quickly, that I look at the beginning of every day, that I look at on a weekly basis and plan out my weeks. And so my expectations there are sky high, and I'm skeptical that a plugin for something that's not designed to do that can meet my needs there. Like I use Akiflow, which is probably one of the more expensive task managers, but I generate so many tasks that it's worthwhile to me. It is sort of the superhuman for me, which is I don't have a lot of email, but I do have a ton of tasks. And so applying what superhuman does for people who have a lot of email to my tasks makes a ton of sense.
Right. I don't know if I've heard of that one.
Yeah, here, let me see if I
Flow.
can pull it up. I do have an affiliate deal with them, and this would be the perfect time to say, hey, here's my
Oh,
affiliate
they
deal. But I was using them before that. So, but what Akiflow does is it's basically a completely keyboard driven task management tool that combines your task manager and your calendar so that you're honest with yourself about like what you can get done. I
yeah.
would show you mine, but it's
No,
riddled
I
with
understand. Yeah.
proprietary work stuff that I would have no way to redact. But basically, I time block every day because I am naturally someone who likes to say yes to things that move things forward. So, like if it's moving the mission forward, I will say yes. But what time blocking and Akiflow let me do is have a reasonable understanding of how full my week is so that I know when I can say yes and when I can't say yes. Or maybe it's a
Yeah.
yes, but not this week.
Love it. Yeah, I thought for a while that I could use Para with a note-taking app that lets me focus on my day, but it's just not working. It's like I got to try something else. Whether it's I like Fantastical. Fantastical
Mm-hmm.
has Finders integration, Todoist integration, so you can kind of do something similar to this system. But
Yep.
this one is definitely worth investigating.
So I also was a Fantastical user. Actually, this is going to sound awful, but go watch my Akiflow video because I actually touched specifically on that, which is
Go watch my video. We'll
Fantastical is
tag to it.
Fantastical is a great calendar, but not a great to-do list. And I
Right.
was using TickTick, which was a great task manager, but an awful calendar.
Hmm.
And so there was a constant trade-off there where I actually needed both tools, and Akiflow finally was able to replace my need for both tools, and they did both things well enough that I was able to remove a tool from my life, and I took some satisfaction in that.
Cool. No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, and there's a lot of integrations here. Oh man.
Oh, yeah, I didn't get into that. So, okay, the coolest thing about Akiflow, and sorry, this became an Akiflow ad on accident, but the best thing about it is you can integrate it to Slack and you can integrate it to Gmail. And so if you save an item in Slack, it becomes a task in Akiflow. And if you star an email in Gmail, it'll go into your task manager because Slack messages and emails take time to respond to as well, especially like as an
Yeah.
engineer. Like a lot of those aren't 5 minute responses. They require some actual digging to answer that question. And so
Right.
that deserves time blocking just like your tickets in Jira. And actually they just added Jira support. That wasn't there when I started, but they have Jira support now.
Are you linking to Obsidian notes at all yet in that system?
Yes. So
I know Obsidian
let me see if I
offers.
can show you. Let me go to like some week in the future. So like let's look at Saturday a week from now. This is not going to give you like a full picture of this, but it'll at least demonstrate my point. Here is 4 days from now. So I can just tap on here and create a task. And one of the native things here is this idea of a link. And so the thing that works through the URL protocol in macOS also
Yep.
works here. So like if I go into Obsidian and I grab some link to a file, so I have Command Shift C bound to copy link, I can then just go in here and create a task. So remind, like, work, create new quarter dashboard. And if I paste that link, it'll be referenced as a link. And now if I go into Akiflow, I can just tap O on this and it'll open the link. For whatever reason, it didn't recognize it as a link when I did it that way, but if I put it in here, if I tap on this file and then press O, it'll open Obsidian for me and jump me straight there.
That's great.
And you can actually have multiple links. So like if it's not just this, it's something else as well.
That's cool.
You can have all of them, and then when you press O, it'll open all of them for you. So like, let's say I've got that ticket open, press O, and I've got Arc over here.
Your Arc pop up. Yep.
Yep, and it's right there.
No, I love that.
So pretty handy.
And then projects, not that you want to show them maybe right now, but there's this concept of grouping them into projects, your tasks.
I would say if you're a project purist, that's probably an area where you may find this a little lacking. I think a core tenet behind Akiflow is you boil everything down into tasks, and then you can set intention dates and due dates on tasks. And then they recently added this thing called tags, which are basically areas. And so like if I go into Monday reading, these are all the things that I need to read on Monday nights that I haven't gotten around to. And so like this is the closest thing you really have to a project, and your real metadata is all in your tasks themselves. Yeah. So depending on your definition of projects, that may or may not meet it. And that I would say is probably the biggest shortcoming of Akiflow. The way I work, I don't suffer from it, but I'm in a job that has the luxury of not dealing with a lot of projects per se in the most formal of senses. But yeah, like that is probably one thing to watch out for.
That makes sense. Well, cool. Well, Brandon, this was a really interesting conversation. Thanks again.
Yeah, it's a blast whenever we get together. We'll have to figure out what the next topic should be. Maybe in a month from now, once you've had a chance to.
Yeah, my Obsidian workflow is going to shape up. I think I've just decided it's worth the plunge. And you've given me some helpful ideas in this conversation to, I guess, organize the notes. That's sort of the thing I didn't quite catch yet. I just started this week in the process. So it's like, all right, how do I tag and mark and label and sort all of these notes? And so that's what I'll do next.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest recommendation I have is start simple. Like I think a lot of people try to build the de facto system and then they drown in effort and metadata. And so just keep it simple until you feel like you're brushing up against a rough edge that you really need to hone out. Because like I've seen all these systems, and what you often see is where someone has landed 2 years later, not where they were a month in or wherever you are in your journey. And jumping from 0 to 2 years in is a big jump, and you really can't
absolutely
take advantage of all of it from the start. You have to kind of build on the basics.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And I think for me, I have to just fully recognize that I think task management and note taking will best serve me if they're separate. I've been doing the craft thing where crafts are projects and projects are things that need to be done. And those things have items in them like task lists and checklists. And it's not really working. So I gotta pivot. So I will be.
You may find the opposite problem. I guess I'll be upfront with you. You may find the opposite problem, which is there's some duplication of the things that you're marking complete in your task list in your daily notes. But it's kind of nice to be able to selectively choose what goes in there. But if you're a person who wants your daily note to be an exhaustive representation of everything you did, there's definitely some duplication there. So it's kind of a personality thing of like what feels right for you. Thank you so much for watching. Do hit subscribe for more Obsidian content like this in the future, and you can help me out a ton by liking and sharing the video. If you're looking for some more Obsidian content, I've got a playlist of my tips and tricks right over here on the side. Until next time, I'll see you in the next video.